He did this, and his life changed forever. He was always just an ordinary cowboy. Quiet, tough. The kind of man who lived for the open range and kept his pain tucked behind a grin. His days passed by in a rhythm of saddles, sunsets, and silence. Nothing ever hinted at how deeply he'd mattered, or how deeply he'd been missed. But one day something happened that turned everything upside down. At first it seemed like a simple visit. Just Clint Eastwood showing up to see his oldest friend now dying in a quiet hospice bed. A nod, a hand on the shoulder, two men sharing a lifetime with just a look. But then, things started to get even stranger. Seconds felt like an eternity. Clint sat in stillness, watching breath after breath grow weaker. And then, at that very moment, when it seemed like the silence would be the last thing they shared, the cowboy spoke. His voice cracked through the stillness, and what he said, about regret, brotherhood, and one final promise, would haunt Clint for the rest of his life. But the most unbelievable part happened after that. It was so incredible that if someone had told him before, he never would have believed it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Grove as Clint Eastwood's Range Rover rolled slowly into town. At 93, his face was more weathered than ever, deep lines etched by decades under the California sun and countless film sets. His eyes, however, remained sharp beneath the brim of his hat, the same penetrating gaze that had defined his career from Rawhide to Gran Torino. He hadn't been back to Cedar Grove in nearly 40 years. The last time was for location scouting on Pale Rider, though they'd ultimately chosen Idaho instead. The town had changed less than he expected. The false-fronted buildings along Main Street had been repainted, but their bones remained the same. The old Cattleman's Bank was now a craft brewery. The general store had become a tourist shop, selling cowboy memorabilia and local honey. But the mountains that framed the valley stood eternal, indifferent to human concerns. Clint parked in front of the Cedar Grove Inn, a two-story Victorian structure with a wide porch and gingerbread trim. As he stepped out, his knees protested briefly, a reminder of stunts performed decades ago and horses ridden too hard. A young woman with copper hair emerged from the inn, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mr. Eastwood?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "We've been expecting you. I'm Grace Tillman." "Sheriff Tillman's daughter?" Clint asked, extending his hand. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. "Granddaughter, actually. Sheriff myself now." She tapped the star pinned to her belt, partially hidden beneath her apron. "Didn't realize you knew my grandfather." "Met him back in '83, Clint said, retrieving his duffel bag from the back seat. "Good man, straight shooter." "That he was," Grace agreed. "Room's all ready for you. Best one in the house. Not that we have many competitors these days." Clint followed her up the wooden steps, each one creaking beneath his weight. The inn's interior was cool and dim after the bright morning sun, walls adorned with black and white photographs of the town's history. He paused at one showing a group of cowboys posed stiffly before a cattle drive, dated 1892. "Your message said you were here to see Marcus Harlan," Grace said, leading him up a narrow staircase. "Known him long? Since before you were born," Clint replied, his voice giving away nothing. "Heard he wasn't doing well." Grace's face softened. "Cancer. Doctors gave him 6 months. That was 4 months ago." She stopped at the landing, turning to face him. "He doesn't get many visitors out at that old ranch. Keeps to himself, always has. People around here respect that, but..." She hesitated. "It's good you came." The room was simple but comfortable. A queen bed with a handmade quilt, pine furniture, and windows overlooking the mountains to the east. Grace set his key on the dresser. "Breakfast starts at 6. Kitchen closes at 9. She paused at the door. "Mr. Eastwood, whatever happened between you and Marcus, he's a good man. Always has been." After she left, Clint stood at the window gazing at the mountains. The last time he'd seen Marcus Harlan was in 1988, They'd argued, voices raised, words said that couldn't be taken back. 35 years of silence followed. Now time was running out. He unpacked methodically, hanging his clothes in the closet. From the bottom of his bag, he removed a small wooden box, its surface smooth from years of handling. He placed it on the nightstand, then sat heavily on the bed, feeling every one of his 93 years. "Well, Marcus," he murmured to the empty room, "let's see if we can make things right." By mid-afternoon, Clint was driving his Range Rover along a rutted dirt road that wound through sagebrush and juniper. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes back, but Grace's directions were clear enough. The Broken Spur Ranch lay 10 miles outside town, nestled against the foothills where the valley narrowed. As he rounded a bend, the ranch came into view, a weathered 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch, a red barn listing slightly to one side, and several outbuildings scattered across the property. A split-rail fence bordered the road, interrupted by an arched wooden sign reading, "Broken Spur Ranch, Estier, 1876. Clint pulled up to the house, killing the engine. The silence that followed was profound. No traffic noise, no hum of civilization. Just the whisper of wind through the junipers and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk. He sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then stepped out into the afternoon heat. Before he reached the porch steps, the front door opened. Marcus Harlan stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane. At 85, he was still tall, though his once broad shoulders had narrowed with age. His face was gaunt, skin stretched, tight over prominent cheekbones, but his eyes were the same. Pale blue like winter sky. "Figured you'd show up eventually," Marcus said, his voice rougher than Clint remembered. "Took you long enough." "Got your letter 3 weeks ago," Clint replied. "Had to wrap a project first." Marcus nodded, as if this explained everything. "Still, making movies at your age? Still breaking horses at yours?" A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. "Not for a while now." He stepped back from the doorway. "Come on in. Sun's too damn hot to stand around jawing." The interior of the house was cool and dim. Clint followed Marcus through a living room furnished with worn leather chairs and a stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with well-thumbed volumes. No television was visible. The walls were adorned with photographs, horses mainly, but also landscapes and a few people. Clint noticed his own face in one, much younger, standing beside Marcus near a corral. Both were smiling. Marcus led him to the kitchen at the back of the house, a large open space with a pine table by windows overlooking the mountains. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, but waved off Clint's attempt to help. "Coffee?" he asked, gesturing to a pot on the stove. "Sure." Marcus filled 2 mugs, his hands steady despite his obvious weakness. He set them on the table and lowered himself carefully into a chair. "Doctor says I shouldn't have caffeine anymore," he said, taking a sip. "Told him I'd rather die happy than live miserable." Clint settled across from him. "Always were stubborn." "Look, who's talking?" Marcus studied him over the rim of his mug. "You look good. Hollywood must agree with you." "It has its moments." Clint glanced around the kitchen, clean but lived in, with copper pots hanging from a rack and herbs drying in bundles by the window. "Place hasn't changed much." "No reason to change what works." Marcus set down his mug. "Didn't ask you here." "For small talk, Clint." "Figured as much." Marcus pushed back from the table. "Come on, want to show you something first." They walked slowly through the back door onto a covered porch that ran the length of the house. Steps led down to a path winding through a vegetable garden, then past a small orchard of apple trees. Beyond lay a pasture where 6 horses grazed. Most were older animals, their muzzles graying. "Retirement home for old cow ponies," Marcus explained. "Can't bear to see a good horse end up at auction when it's too old to work." At the far end of the pasture stood a large oak tree, its massive branches providing shade over a wide area. Beneath it, a black horse raised its head to watch their approach, ears pricked forward with interest. "That's Midnight," Marcus said. "Remember him?" Clint stopped, staring at the horse. "Can't be. That was 40 years ago." His grandson, Marcus clarified. Spitting image of the original, though. Same white star, same attitude. The black horse approached the fence, nickering softly. His coat gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the white star on his forehead stood out like a beacon. Clint extended his hand, and the horse sniffed it curiously before allowing him to stroke its neck. Midnight was the best cutting horse I ever rode, Clint said quietly. Never knew you kept breeding his line. Some things are worth preserving, Marcus replied. He leaned against the fence, breathing more heavily than the short walk should have warranted. Got his great-granddaughter in the barn now, just foaled last spring. Pretty little filly with the same star. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the horses graze. A red merle Australian shepherd appeared from around the barn, trotting purposefully toward them. Despite gray around her muzzle, she moved with the fluid grace of a working dog. That's Sadie, Marcus said as the dog reached them, pressing against his leg. Best cattle dog I ever had, getting on in years now, like her master. Clint crouched to offer his hand to the dog, who sniffed it thoroughly before allowing him to scratch behind her ears. Good-looking dog. Found her half dead in a ditch during that big snowstorm in 14. Someone dumped her, looked like. Nursed her back, and she's been running this place ever since. Marcus's voice held unmistakable affection. Smarter than most people I know. As they made their way back toward the house, Clint noticed Marcus's breathing growing more labored. Without comment, he slowed his pace, allowing the older man to set the tempo. They stopped at a small shed near the garden, where Marcus unlocked a padlock and swung the door open. Inside, a gleaming 1956 Ford F-100 pickup truck sat in the dim light, its turquoise and white paint job immaculate. Remember this? Marcus asked. Clint circled the truck slowly. The one we took to Mexico in '68? The very same. Rebuilt her myself about 10 years back. Engine purrs like a kitten. Clint ran his hand along the truck's fender. That was some trip. 3 weeks? 4 border towns and that cantina in Nogales where you nearly got us killed. Marcus chuckled, then winced, pressing a hand to his side. You okay? Clint asked, moving toward him. Marcus waved him off. Just the usual. Gets worse in the evenings. He secured the shed and they continued toward the house. Been meaning to ask, whatever happened to that girl? The one from the cantina? Elena? Clint shook his head. No idea. That was a lifetime ago. By the time they reached the porch, Marcus was leaning heavily on his cane, his face pale beneath his tan. He lowered himself carefully into one of the rocking chairs. Need to rest a bit, he admitted. Not as spry as I used to be. Clint took the adjacent chair, stretching his long legs out before him. The view from the porch encompassed the entire valley, with the town of Cedar Grove visible as a small cluster of buildings in the distance. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light. Beautiful place, Clint observed. Always was. That's why I never left, Marcus replied. Had offers over the years. Developers wanting to build vacation homes, resort companies. Turned them all down. He gestured toward the mountains. This land's been in my family for 5 generations, means something. Your boy doesn't want it? A shadow crossed Marcus's face. Michael hasn't set foot on this ranch in 15 years. Lives in Seattle now, works for some tech company. Says there's no future in ranching. He sighed. Can't entirely blame him. It's a hard life, getting harder every year. They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Sadie settled at Marcus's feet, her eyes closing in contentment. You're probably wondering why I wrote to you after all this time, Marcus said finally. Crossed my mind. Marcus turned to look at him directly. I'm dying, Clint. Cancer's in my liver, my lungs. Doctors say I've got weeks, maybe a month or 2 if I'm lucky. He spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity. Got some things I need to set right before I go. You're one of them. Clint nodded slowly. That argument in '88 was a damn fool thing, Marcus finished. Both of us too stubborn to back down. 35 years is a long time to hold a grudge. Too long, Clint agreed. There's more to it than that, though. Marcus shifted in his chair, wincing again. Things I never told. You things you deserve to know. He glanced at the darkening sky. But not tonight. I'm beat, and these pain meds make my thoughts fuzzy. Tomorrow we'll talk properly. As if on cue, a battered pickup truck came bouncing up the drive, raising a cloud of dust. It parked beside Clint's Range Rover, and a woman in her 60s emerged, carrying several grocery bags. That's Rosa, Marcus explained. Comes by every evening, makes sure I eat, helps with the heavier chores. Been a godsend these past few months. Rosa approached the porch, her dark eyes widening at the sight of Clint. Mr. Eastwood, she said, clearly surprised. Marcus didn't tell me you were coming. Didn't know for sure myself until yesterday, Marcus replied. He made introductions, explaining that Rosa Diaz had been the local school teacher for 30 years before retiring. I've made enchiladas, she told them, heading for the kitchen door. More than enough for 3. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Rosa carrying most of the conversation, sharing stories of Cedar Grove's transformation over the decades. Clint found himself relaxing for the first time since receiving Marcus's letter. The food was excellent, the company comfortable, and, for a while, the specter of Marcus's illness receded into the background. After Rosa left, promising to return in the morning, Marcus suggested they move to the porch. The night was clear, stars emerging in a velvet sky untainted by city lights. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon into glasses, handing one to Clint. Doctor, says no alcohol either, he remarked with a wry smile. Figure what's it going to do, kill me? They sipped in silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the soft nickering of horses in the pasture. Remember that night in Monument Valley? Marcus asked suddenly. During the filming of 2 Mules for Sister Sarah? Clint nodded. The meteor shower. Never seen anything like it before or since, like the stars were raining down just for us. Marcus gazed up at the sky. That's when I knew. Knew what? That our friendship was something special, different. He turned to Clint, his expression serious in the dim light. We've had a good run, haven't we? Despite everything. We have, Clint agreed, feeling a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with age. Tomorrow, Marcus said, setting down his empty glass. Tomorrow I'll tell you everything. Later, as Clint drove back to town, the night pressing close around his headlights, he found himself thinking about time. How it slipped away. How 35 years could pass in what felt like moments. He'd come to Cedar Grove expecting to make peace with an old friend before the end. Now he sensed there was more to Marcus's summons, something left unsaid that might change everything. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Clint breakfasted early at the inn, then drove back to the Broken Spur. He found Marcus at the corral watching as Rosa's son Miguel exercised the horses. Despite his obvious weakness, Marcus's eyes were sharp as he observed each animal's movement. Marcus's hand tightened on the rope as he finished securing the boat. Sheriff Grace's words still hung in the air between them when he noticed the fresh scratches along the hull. Long, deliberate gouges that couldn't have been made by rocks or driftwood. Someone had taken a knife to his old fishing boat. You see this? He asked, running weathered fingers along the damaged fiberglass. Grace crouched beside him, her copper hair catching the morning light. Vandalism? Or a warning? Marcus straightened slowly, his joints protesting. The pain in his side flared, a constant reminder of what was growing inside him. 3rd incident this month. You should have reported the others, Grace said, her voice carrying the authoritative edge she'd developed since pinning on her grandfather's star. What else happened? Marcus shrugged, unwilling to appear concerned. Cut fence on the north pasture. Feed bin tampered with. He didn't mention the dead coyote he'd found on his porch steps 2 weeks ago. Its throat slit. No need to worry her more than necessary. This have anything to do with why Clint Eastwood is suddenly in town? Grace asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. Before Marcus could answer, the crunch of tires on gravel announced Clint's arrival. The Range Rover pulled up beside Grace's patrol SUV, dust settling around it in the morning stillness. Clint emerged, his tall frame unfolding from the driver's seat with a deliberate grace that belied his age. "Morning," he called, approaching the dock where they stood. His gaze took in the damaged boat, then shifted to Grace's uniform. "Everything all right?" "Just catching up," Marcus said before Grace could respond. "Sheriff was checking in, like she does with all us old-timers." Grace gave him a look that said she wasn't fooled. "Mr. Eastwood, good to see you again. Enjoying your stay in Cedar Grove?" "So far," Clint replied, "though I get the feeling I've interrupted something." "Not at all," Marcus said too quickly. "Grace was just leaving. Busy day ahead, right, Sheriff?" Grace hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be back tomorrow to take a proper report about the boat. And Marcus," her voice softened, "call me if anything else happens, day or night." After she drove away, Clint turned to Marcus, one eyebrow raised. "Want to tell me what that was really about?" Marcus sighed, suddenly feeling every one of his 85 years. "Let's head back to the house. Could use some coffee before we get into all that." They walked slowly along the path that wound from the small lake back to the ranch house. The morning was perfect, clear blue sky, the scent of sage and pine carried on a gentle breeze, meadowlarks calling from fence posts. In another life, another time, Marcus would have saddled up Ranger, his favorite gelding, and ridden the property line just for the joy of it. Now each step was measured, each breath a reminder of what he was losing. "Someone's been messing with your property," Clint observed as they walked. "Not a question." "Started about a month ago," Marcus admitted. "Small things at first. Gate left open, tools moved around. Could have blamed it on forgetfulness. God knows my memory isn't what it used to be." He paused to catch his breath, leaning on his cane. Then it escalated. "Cut fence, tampered feed, now the boat. You have enemies I should know about?" Marcus gave a short laugh that turned into a cough. "At my age, most of them are dead." He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, pretending not to notice the flecks of blood. "Though there's always Harlan development. Your son's company? Michael's the face of it, but he's just a figurehead. The real money comes from his father-in-law, Victor Caldwell." Marcus spat the name like it tasted. Hadn't been trying to get his hands on this land for years. Wants to build a resort, golf course, luxury homes, the whole 9 yards. They reached the house where Sadie greeted them with enthusiastic tail wagging. The old Australian shepherd pressed against Marcus's leg, sensing his discomfort. He scratched behind her ears, drawing comfort from her solid presence. In the kitchen, Marcus moved slowly but efficiently, measuring coffee grounds into the percolator. No fancy espresso machines for him. Clint sat at the pine table, watching him with a filmmaker's eye for detail. The slight tremor in Marcus's hands, the careful way he managed his breathing, the occasional wince when he moved too quickly. "You're worse than yesterday," Clint observed quietly. Marcus didn't deny it. "Mornings are usually better. Guess today's an exception." He set 2 mugs on the table and lowered himself into a chair. "Doctor wanted to put me in hospice last week. Told him I'd die in my own damn house, thank you very much." Stubborn as ever. "Look, who's talking?" Marcus's pale blue eyes met Clint's. "You still ride horses and direct movies at 93. Neither of us knows when to quit." The coffee percolator bubbled to completion, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Marcus started to rise, but Clint waved him back down and poured for both of them. They drank in companionable silence for a moment, the familiar ritual bridging, the decades of separation. "So," Clint said finally, "you mentioned last night there were things I deserved to know. Things you never told me." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression growing serious. "Been carrying some secrets a long time, Clint. Figure it's time to unburden myself before I go." He took another sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "But first, there's something I need to show you." He led Clint to his study, a small room, off the living area filled with bookshelves, a sturdy desk, and a leather chair worn smooth by years of use. A large window overlooked the mountains, the view framed by heavy curtains that had once been burgundy, but had faded to a softer shade with time. Marcus unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed. with age. My father started keeping this record in 1932, he explained, setting it carefully on the desk. I continued after he died. Every significant event on this ranch for the past 90 years is documented here. He opened the ledger to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was different here, younger, steadier than the entries before and after. October 12, 1968, he read aloud. Found something in the North Cave that changes everything. Can't tell a soul, not even Diane. The implications are too dangerous. Clint leaned closer. What did you find? Marcus closed the ledger. That's what I want to show you. But it's not an easy hike, and I'm not sure I can make it on my own anymore. He looked up at Clint, vulnerability showing through his usual stoic demeanor. Thought maybe you could help me get there one last time. The North Cave, Clint repeated. That's up in the foothills? About 2 miles from here, as the crow flies. Used to be an easy ride, but... Marcus gestured to himself, the unspoken reality of his condition hanging between them. We'll figure it out, Clint assured him. Maybe take the truck part way? Marcus nodded. The old fire road gets us within half a mile. It'll be rough going, but I think I can manage that much. He checked his watch. We should wait until afternoon, though. I need to rest, and Rosa will be here soon with lunch. As if summoned by her name, they heard the sound of Rosa's pickup coming up the drive. Marcus carefully returned the ledger to its drawer, locking it with a small key he kept on his keychain. Not a word to Rosa about this, he cautioned. She means well, but she'd try to talk me out of it. Doctor's orders and all that nonsense. Clint nodded, understanding. At their age, well-meaning concern could become a cage, limiting what little freedom remained. He'd experienced it himself. Producers worried about insurance, family members suggesting it might be time to retire. The constant, subtle message, you're too old for this. Rosa bustled in with groceries and a cheerful greeting. She set about preparing lunch, filling the kitchen with the scent of sautéed onions and peppers. While she cooked, Marcus excused himself to rest, leaving Clint to help Rosa and field her curious questions about Hollywood. He seems worse today, Rosa observed quietly as she chopped cilantro. The pain medication makes him foggy, but he hates taking it. He mentioned that, Clint replied, slicing tomatoes at her direction. How long have you been helping him? Almost a year now. Started just a few hours a week after his diagnosis, but... She shook her head. He's so stubborn. Refuses to hire full-time help, won't consider assisted living. Says he was born on this ranch and intends to die here. Sounds like Marcus. Rosa gave him a searching look. You two must have been close once. He has that photograph of you both, in the living room. The only personal photo he displays. Clint nodded, remembering the image. We were like brothers back in the day. Met on a film set in '65, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Marcus was a horse wrangler, best I'd ever seen. Had a way with even the most difficult animals. What happened? If you don't mind my asking. Clint continued slicing tomatoes, considering how much to share. Disagreement in '88. Both said things we shouldn't have. Then life got in the way. My directing career took off. Marcus had the ranch to run. 35 years slipped by. And now there's no time left to waste, Rosa said, softly, something like that. After lunch, Rosa left to teach her afternoon art class at the community center, promising to return for dinner. Marcus, looking somewhat refreshed after his rest, suggested they prepare for their expedition to the North Cave. We'll need water, flashlights, he said, moving around the kitchen with purpose. The cave entrance is small, easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. Clint watched him pack supplies into an old backpack, noting the renewed energy in his movements. Whatever was in that cave clearly mattered deeply to Marcus. This have anything to do with the vandalism? Clint asked as Marcus added a first aid kit to the pack. Marcus paused. Maybe. Probably not. That's more likely Caldwell trying to pressure me into selling. He zipped the backpack closed. What's in the cave? That's different. Personal. They took the old Ford F-100 pickup, its restored engine purring smoothly as Marcus navigated the rutted fire road that wound up into the foothills. The truck's suspension, while well-maintained, couldn't completely smooth the rough terrain. And Clint noticed Marcus wincing with each significant bump. "We can turn back," he offered after a particularly jarring section. "Not a chance," Marcus replied, his jaw set with determination. "Been putting this off too long already." The fire road ended at a small clearing surrounded by juniper and pinyon, pine. Marcus parked the truck and shut off the engine, the sudden silence enveloping them. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk circled lazily on thermal currents. "Half a mile that way," Marcus said, pointing toward a rocky outcropping. "Used to be a game trail, but it's probably overgrown now. Haven't been up here in at least 5 years." They set out slowly, Marcus leaning heavily on his cane, occasionally accepting Clint's steadying hand on the steeper sections. The trail was indeed overgrown in places, but still discernible. A slightly flattened path through the sage and bunch grass, winding between boulders and around stands of juniper. Despite the moderate temperature, sweat soon beaded on Marcus's forehead, and his breathing grew labored. Clint called for frequent rest stops, pretending he was the one who needed them. They sat on sun-warmed rocks, sharing water from canteens, looking out over the valley spread below them. "Worth the climb just for this view," Clint remarked during one such break. Marcus nodded, his gaze sweeping across his property and beyond, to where Cedar Grove nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. "Used to ride up here at least once a week. Good place to think." "When did you first find the cave?" "I was 12, 1950, tracking a wounded deer with my father." Marcus took another sip of water. "We never found the deer, but I spotted the cave entrance. Just a narrow crack in the rock face. Would have missed it if the light hadn't been just right. Your father's entry in the ledger was from 68, though." Marcus's expression grew distant. "That's when I found what's inside. Went back to the cave many times over the years. It was a good shelter during storms, cool in summer. But I never explored the back section until 68. He recapped his canteen. "Come on. We're burning daylight." The final approach to the cave was the most challenging. A steep slope of loose shale leading to a rock face where the narrow entrance was barely visible, a dark slash in the gray stone. Marcus struggled here, his boots slipping on the unstable surface. Without discussion, Clint moved to support him, one arm around his waist, taking some of his weight. Together, they made the final ascent. At the cave entrance, Marcus paused, catching his breath. "Been a long time," he murmured, more to himself than to Clint. He switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness beyond the narrow opening. "Watch your head going in. Opens up after about 10 feet. They entered single file, Marcus leading the way despite Clint's suggestion that he go first. The passage was indeed tight, requiring them to turn sideways in places, the rough stone walls pressing close on either side. Then, as promised, the space widened into a chamber roughly 20 feet across, the ceiling high enough that they could stand comfortably. Clint switched on his own flashlight, sweeping the beam around the space. The floor was relatively flat, with some evidence of past campfires, a circle of stones blackened by smoke. The walls showed signs of water erosion, smooth in some places, rippled in others. "People have used this cave for centuries," Marcus explained, his voice echoing slightly. "Found arrowheads, pottery shards. The local Paiute considered it a sacred place." He moved toward the back of the chamber where the darkness seemed more absolute. "What I want to show you is through here." Directed his flashlight beam at what appeared to be a solid rock wall. Upon closer inspection, Clint could see a narrow fissure, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. "That's our path?" he asked, eyeing the opening skeptically. Marcus nodded. "It's tight, but it opens up on the other side. Think you can manage it?" "If you can, I can," Clint replied, though he wondered if that was true. Marcus was thinner now, wasted by disease. Marcus went first again, turning sideways to slip through the fissure. Clint followed, feeling the cold stone press against his chest and back simultaneously. For a moment, he felt a flicker of claustrophobia, if they got stuck here miles from help. Then he was through, emerging into a space so unexpected it momentarily took his breath away. This chamber was larger than the first, and unlike the rough-hewn outer cave, its walls were covered in paintings. Hundreds of ochre, white, and black figures depicting humans, animals, and symbols Clint couldn't identify. "My God," he breathed, his flashlight beam playing across the ancient artwork. "How old is this?" "The Paiute paintings are maybe 1,000 years old," Marcus replied, his own light illuminating a hunting scene where stick-figure men pursued what appeared to be antelope. "But that's not what I brought you to see." He moved deeper into the chamber, to where the floor sloped downward toward a natural alcove. Here, the rock wall had been cleared of paintings, and instead bore more recent markings, letters, and numbers carved directly into the stone. Clint moved closer, focusing his light on the carvings. They appeared to be coordinates along with a date, 7/16/47, July 16, 1947, Marcus said quietly. 2 weeks after Roswell. Clint looked at him sharply. "You're not suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm showing you what I found." Marcus directed his flashlight to the floor of the alcove where a metal box sat, its surface tarnished with age. "That wasn't here in '68. I found something else then, something I reburied elsewhere. This appeared about 10 years ago in the same spot." Clint crouched beside the box, examining it without touching. It was roughly the size of a shoebox, made of what appeared to be aluminum, with no visible hinges or latches. Its surface was etched with symbols similar to those on the cave walls but more precise, more geometric in nature. "Have you opened it?" Clint asked, circling the box with his flashlight beam. "No," Marcus admitted. "After what happened in '68, I was afraid to." He lowered himself carefully to sit on a flat rock, his breathing labored from the exertion of their journey. "That's why I needed you here. Whatever's inside, I don't want to face it alone." Clint studied his old friend's face in the flashlight's glow. Despite his illness, Marcus's eyes were clear, his expression resolute. "What exactly happened in '68, Marcus?" Marcus was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "I found a piece of metal," he finally said. "Unlike anything I'd ever seen. Lightweight but impossibly strong. Couldn't cut it, couldn't bend it. Had strange markings, similar to these." He gestured to the symbols on the box. 3 days after I found it, men came to the ranch, said they were from the government, showed credentials that looked official enough. They were looking for the metal? They didn't say so directly, but yes, asked if I'd found anything unusual in the area, searched the property while claiming it was a routine check for antiquities on private land. Marcus's expression darkened. I'd already hidden the metal by then. Didn't trust them. Something in their eyes. "What did you do with it?" "Buried it, not here. Somewhere only I know." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping. "A week later, my neighbor's place burned down. Official report said faulty wiring, but Tom Jenkins was meticulous about his equipment. Then there was a string of cattle mutilations across 3 counties, and a local man who'd reported seeing strange lights in the sky was committed to a psychiatric hospital." Clint absorbed this information, his director's mind automatically constructing the narrative. "You think it was all connected to whatever crashed here?" "I don't know what to think," Marcus admitted. "But I've kept my mouth shut for 55 years, didn't even tell Diane before she passed." He nodded toward the metal box. "Now this appears in the same spot. Can't be coincidence." Clint turned his attention back to the box. Upon closer inspection, he could see that one side had a subtle seam, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. "I think it opens here," he said, pointing. Marcus nodded. "That's my guess too. Question is, should we open it?" The cave was silent except for their breathing and the occasional drip of water from somewhere in the darkness. Outside, the world continued its normal rhythm. Wind through juniper, hawks hunting field mice, the sun tracking across the sky. In here, time seemed suspended, the ancient paintings watching them with mute witness. "You didn't bring me all this way not to open it," Clint observed. A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. "No, I suppose I didn't." He straightened. Decision made. Let's do it together. Clint positioned his flashlight to illuminate the box fully, then reached out, with both hands. The metal was cool to the touch and had a strange texture. Not quite smooth, not quite rough. He applied gentle pressure to either side of the seam, and to his surprise, the top portion lifted easily, as if the box had been waiting for this moment. Inside, nestled in a material that resembled velvet but shimmered with an opalescent quality, lay a small device about the size of a pocket watch. It was made of the same metal as the box, with a circular face covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "What the hell?" Clint murmured, resisting the urge to touch it. Marcus leaned closer, his expression a mixture of vindication and apprehension. "All these years I thought maybe I'd imagined it, that the piece I found was just some experimental aircraft material, that the men were actually who they claimed to be. This is..." Clint searched for words. "This is beyond experimental." As they stared at the device, one of the symbols on its face began to glow with a soft blue light, then another, and another, until a pattern emerged, a constellation neither of them recognized. "It's activated," Marcus whispered. "Just by opening the box." The blue glow intensified, casting eerie shadows on the cave paintings surrounding them. The device began to emit a low hum, just at the threshold of hearing, more felt than heard. "Should we close it?" Clint asked, suddenly uneasy. Before Marcus could answer, the device projected a beam of light upward, which expanded into what could only be described as a holographic display. A three-dimensional map of stars and planets rotating slowly in the air above the box. "My God," Marcus breathed. "It's a map." One particular star system in the projection was highlighted, pulsing with the same blue light as the symbols on the device. As they watched, the map zoomed in on this system, revealing multiple planets orbiting a binary star. "This is what I've been carrying all these years," Marcus said softly. "The knowledge that we're not alone, that they've been here, left things behind." He looked at Clint, his expression solemn. "Now you understand why I couldn't tell anyone, why I needed someone I trusted completely to share this with before I die." The implications were staggering. If this was genuine, and the technology displaying the star map certainly suggested it was, then everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe was wrong. "The vandalism," Clint said suddenly. "You think someone knows about this?" Marcus nodded grimly. "The timing's too convenient. A month after I retrieved this box from its hiding place, the incident started. Someone's watching the ranch. Maybe the same people from '68, or their successors. We need to get this somewhere safe," Clint decided. "And you too." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I'm not leaving the ranch. Whatever time I have left, I'm spending it here." He gestured to the device. "But this needs to be protected. Studied by the right people, not hidden away in some government warehouse." The holographic display flickered, then stabilized, now showing what appeared to be a sequence of mathematical equations. The symbols shifted and changed, as if the device was attempting to communicate. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "It's trying to tell us something," Marcus murmured. A sound from the outer cave interrupted them, a scuffing noise like a boot on stone. They froze, exchanging alarmed glances. Marcus quickly closed the box, cutting off the holographic display, and plunging them back into the relative darkness of their flashlights. "Someone followed us," he whispered. Clint moved toward the fissure, positioning himself to see through to the outer chamber while remaining hidden. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then a beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the floor of the outer cave. "We know you're in there, Mr. Harlan," a male voice called. "We just want to talk." Marcus's face hardened. "Caldwell's men," he muttered. "Or worse." The river flowed on, indifferent to their troubles. But Marcus knew the piece of its surface was an illusion. Like the calm he'd built here in Cedar Grove, it could be shattered in an instant. The only question was whether he'd be the one to break it, or if that choice would be made for him. The voice from the outer cave called again, more insistent, this time. "Mr. Harlan? Mr. Eastwood?" We know you're in there. Clint glanced at Marcus, who was clutching the metal box against his chest, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. Options? Clint whispered. Back of the cave connects to a narrow tunnel system, Marcus replied softly. Tight squeeze, but it comes out about a quarter-mile east. Used it as a boy to play tricks on my father. Clint nodded. Decision made. Lead the way. Marcus tucked the box into his jacket and directed his flashlight toward the rear of the chamber, where the ancient paintings gave way to bare rock. What had appeared to be a solid wall revealed itself under careful examination to be another opening. This one even narrower than the fissure they'd passed through earlier. You first, Marcus insisted, his voice strained. I'll follow. Clint hesitated. If they catch up, they won't. Marcus cut him off. Go. Now. The urgency in his friend's voice compelled Clint to action. He turned sideways, drawing in his breath as he slipped into the narrow passage. The rock pressed close on all sides, cool and unyielding. For a moment, panic threatened, a primal fear of being trapped, buried alive in stone. But he pushed it down, focusing on moving forward inch by inch. Behind him, he heard Marcus enter the passage, his breathing labored. The sound of voices from the main chamber grew louder. Whoever had followed them was now inside the cave. The tunnel twisted and turned, forcing them to contort their bodies to navigate its irregular shape. In places, they had to crawl on hands and knees, the rough stone scraping their palms. Clint's flashlight beam revealed only more darkness ahead, the passage seeming endless. You okay back there? He called softly over his shoulder. Keep moving, Marcus managed between ragged breaths. They continued in silence after that, conserving energy for the difficult journey. The tunnel began to slope upward, making progress even more challenging. Clint's knees and back protested. At 93, this kind of physical exertion was far from ideal. He could only imagine how Marcus was faring, weakened by disease. After what felt like an eternity but was probably no more than 15 minutes, Clint felt a change in the air, a freshness that suggested they were nearing an exit. The passage widened slightly, allowing him to move more freely. Then his flashlight beam caught on something ahead, roots dangling from the ceiling and beyond them a patch of daylight. We're almost there, he called back to Marcus. The exit was partially obscured by brush that had grown over it in the years since Marcus had last used this escape route. Clint pushed through, emerging into the late afternoon sunlight with a sense of profound relief. He turned immediately to help Marcus, who was struggling with the final few feet. Marcus emerged looking ghostly, his face gray with exhaustion and streaked with dirt. He collapsed onto the ground, chest heaving with the effort to breathe. The metal box was still clutched tightly against his body. Need. A minute, he gasped. Clint surveyed their surroundings. They had emerged on the eastern slope of the foothill, in a small clearing surrounded by juniper and sage. From this vantage point, they could see part of the broken spur spread out below them, including the distant shape of the ranch house. Any idea who those men were? Clint asked, keeping his voice low despite the distance from the cave. Marcus shook his head, still fighting to regulate his breathing. Could be Caldwell's people, could be others. He finally loosened his grip on the box, setting it carefully on the ground beside him. Government never stopped watching. Not completely. We need to get back to the ranch, Clint said. Call Sheriff Grace. And tell her what? Marcus countered. That men are after a mysterious alien artifact I've been hiding for 50 years? He shook his head. She'd think the cancer's spread to my brain. Then we need a different plan. Clint helped Marcus to his feet, supporting him when he swayed slightly. Can you make it down to the truck? Marcus nodded grimly. No choice, is there? They began the descent, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen from the cave entrance. Marcus leaned heavily on Clint, each step clearly causing him pain. The metal box was now secured inside his jacket, creating an odd bulge over his heart. What's your connection to all this? Marcus asked suddenly as they paused for him to rest. The coordinates in the cave, July 16th, 1947, 2 weeks after Roswell. But that date itself, It means something specific, doesn't it? Clint was silent. For a moment his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Trinity, he said finally. The first nuclear detonation. White Sands, New Mexico, July 16, 1945. Exactly 2 years before. Marcus nodded. Not a coincidence. You think they were monitoring us? After we split the atom? Makes sense, doesn't it? Primitive species suddenly harnessing nuclear energy. We'd probably do the same if we detected it elsewhere. Marcus shifted, wincing. But that doesn't explain why they'd leave artifacts here, on my land. Maybe they didn't intend to, Clint suggested. If something crashed? Maybe. Marcus didn't sound convinced. There's more to it, though. The box appearing 10 years ago in the exact same spot, the symbols matching the ancient paintings. He shook his head. This wasn't random, Clint. This place was chosen. They continued their careful descent, the conversation lapsing as Marcus needed all his concentration just to keep moving. By the time they reached the clearing where they'd left the truck, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. The Ford F-100 sat exactly as they'd left it, seemingly undisturbed. Clint did a quick check of the surroundings before helping Marcus into the passenger seat. As he rounded the hood to the driver's side, he noticed fresh tire tracks overlapping their own. Someone else had been here while they were in the cave. He slid behind the wheel, keeping his observation to himself for the moment. No need to alarm Marcus further until they were safely back at the ranch. The old truck started on the first try, its restored engine purring smoothly as Clint navigated the rutted fire road back down toward the valley. Marcus sat with his eyes closed, one hand pressed against his side, the other resting protectively over the box beneath his jacket. The lines of pain in his face had deepened, and a sheen of sweat covered his forehead despite the cool evening air. Need your medication when we get back, Clint observed, keeping his tone casual. Marcus grunted in acknowledgement, but didn't open his eyes. Won't help much. This kind of pain, it's beyond what the pills can touch. They drove in silence after that, each lost in his own thoughts. The implications of what they'd found in the cave were staggering, raising far more questions than answers. Who had left the box? Why now, when Marcus was dying? And most pressingly, who had followed them to the cave and what did they want? As they approached the ranch, Clint noticed something that made him tense. A black SUV with tinted windows parked beside Rosa's familiar pickup in front of the house. We have company, he said quietly. Marcus opened his eyes, straightening in his seat. Doesn't look like Sheriff Grace's vehicle. No, Clint agreed, slowing the truck as they approached. Want me to keep driving? Head into town? Marcus considered, for a moment, then shook his head. No, this is my land. I'm not running from it. His voice strengthened with resolve. Besides, Rosa's inside. I won't leave her alone with whoever that is. Clint parked the truck a short distance from the house, positioning it for a quick departure if needed. Keep the box hidden, he advised as he cut the engine. Let me do the talking. They approached the house cautiously, Clint subtly adjusting his pace to support Marcus without making it obvious. The front door opened before they reached it and Rosa emerged, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. There you are, she exclaimed. I was getting worried. You have visitors. Her eyes conveyed a message her words did not. She was uneasy about these unexpected guests. Who is it? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. A Mr. Caldwell and his associate, Rosa replied. They said they had business to discuss that couldn't wait. Marcus's face hardened. Victor Caldwell, here in person, that's a first. They entered the house to find 2 men waiting in the living room. The older of the 2 rose as they entered. A tall, distinguished-looking man in his 70s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the rustic setting. His companion remained seated, younger and bulkier, with the watchful eyes of security personnel. Marcus, the older man greeted, his smile not reaching his eyes. I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit. When I heard Clint Eastwood was in town, I thought it was time we finally met in person. He extended his hand toward Clint. Victor Caldwell. I'm a great admirer of your work. Clint shook the offered hand briefly, assessing the man with the practiced eye of someone who had portrayed countless villains and heroes. Caldwell projected confidence and authority, but there was something calculating in his gaze that set off warning bells. What brings you to Cedar Grove, Mr. Caldwell? Clint asked, deliberately casual. Bit out of the way for a man of your resources. Business and pleasure, Caldwell replied smoothly. My company has interests in the region, and I've always enjoyed the natural beauty of this valley. He turned to Marcus. You look tired, old friend. Perhaps we should reschedule our discussion for tomorrow? I'm not your friend, Marcus said flatly, and whatever you have to say, you can say now. Caldwell's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. As you wish, he gestured to Rosa. Perhaps your housekeeper could bring us some refreshments while we talk. I'll make coffee, Rosa said, clearly reluctant to leave but seeing no alternative. Once she had gone to the kitchen, Caldwell's demeanor shifted subtly, the affable mask slipping to reveal something harder beneath. I'll be direct, Marcus. I'm here to make you a final offer on the property. Twice the market value plus a lifetime residence clause. You can live out your days here while we begin development on the unused portions of the land. Marcus's laugh held no humor. Same offer as last month, just delivered in person this time. The answer's still no. I strongly suggest you reconsider, Caldwell said, his voice dropping. Your situation has changed. Your health is declining rapidly. What happens to this land when you're gone? Your son has no interest in ranching. He'll sell to me anyway, probably for less than I'm offering you now. Michael wouldn't, Marcus began. But Caldwell cut him off. Michael has already agreed in principle, he said, satisfaction evident in his tone. He's simply waiting for the inevitable. I'm offering you the chance to control the terms, to secure your legacy. Clint watched Marcus absorb this betrayal, saw the momentary flash of pain that had nothing to do with his physical condition. Then Marcus's expression hardened into resolve. My answer is still no, he said firmly. Now I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. It's been a long day, and as you pointed out, my health isn't what it was. Caldwell studied him for a moment, then nodded to his associate, who rose silently. I'm disappointed, Marcus. I thought having your old friend here might help you see reason. He glanced at Clint. Perhaps you can talk some sense into him, before it's too late. As they moved toward the door, Caldwell paused, turning back. By the way, I heard there was some vandalism on your property recently. Boat damaged, fences cut. Terrible thing. These remote areas can be so vulnerable to random acts of malice. The threat was thinly veiled, and Clint felt a surge of anger at the calculated intimidation. Before he could respond, Marcus spoke, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. Funny thing about that boat, Victor. Sheriff Grace is investigating. Found some interesting evidence. Fingerprints, boot impressions. Modern forensics is remarkable, isn't it? It was a bluff. Grace had done no such thing. But it landed effectively. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Caldwell's face before his smooth mask returned. Indeed, he replied coolly. Well, I won't keep you any longer. Consider my offer, Marcus. It won't be repeated. With a nod to Clint, that might have been respect, or warning. He departed, his associate following like a shadow. As soon as the door closed behind them, Marcus sank into his armchair, the strength that had sustained him through the confrontation evaporating. Rosa emerged from the kitchen, her expression troubled. I don't trust that man, she said, watching through the window as the black SUV pulled away. There's something wrong about him. You're not wrong, Marcus agreed wearily. He carefully extracted the metal box from inside his jacket, setting it on the coffee table. Rosa, I need you to do something for me. Call Sheriff Grace. Tell her, I need to see her privately. No official visit, no uniform, no patrol car. Rosa looked at the box curiously but didn't ask questions. I'll call her now, she said, moving to the kitchen where the landline was located. Once she was out of earshot, Clint sat across from Marcus. You think Caldwell's men were the ones who followed us to the cave? Almost certainly, Marcus nodded. The timing's too convenient. They must have been watching the ranch saw us head up there. He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 85 years. What I can't figure is how they knew about the cave in the first place. Could be they've been searching the property systematically, Clint suggested. Or maybe they have access to geological surveys that show cave systems. Maybe. Marcus didn't sound convinced. Or maybe they know more than they're letting on, about what's really on this land. Rosa returned from the kitchen. Sheriff Grace will be here in about an hour. Said to tell you she's coming as a friend, not in an official capacity. She glanced at the metal box on the table. Should I make dinner while we wait? That would be wonderful, Rosa, Marcus said with genuine gratitude. And if you don't mind, I need a few minutes alone with Clint. Once Rosa had returned to the kitchen, Marcus leaned forward, his voice low. There's something I haven't told you, something I've never told anyone. He glanced toward the kitchen to ensure Rosa couldn't overhear. The piece of metal I found in '68. It wasn't the first unusual thing discovered on this land. Clint raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. My grandfather found something in 1897, Marcus said. Wrote about it in his journal, which I found after my father died. Described a craft of impossible design that crashed in the north pasture during a thunderstorm. Said it contained beings not of this earth. 3 of them, 2 dead, 1 alive. Your grandfather encountered an alien? Clint couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. According to his journal, yes. He tried to help the survivor. Hid it from the townspeople. It lived for almost a week before dying. Before it did, it gave him something. Marcus's pale blue eyes held Clint's. A small device, not unlike what we found today. My grandfather buried it somewhere on the property. Never told anyone except my father, who later told me. And you believe this? Marcus shrugged. Didn't for most of my life. Thought it was a story, maybe something my grandfather made up to entertain my father. Then I found that piece of metal in '68 with markings similar to what my grandfather had drawn in his journal. He tapped the metal box. And now this. 3 incidents spanning more than a century, Clint mused. All on your land. All on my land, Marcus confirmed. That's why I can't sell to Caldwell. It's not about the money or even preserving the ranch. It's about protecting what's here. He leaned back, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. My family has been guardians without knowing what we were guarding. I can't be the one who fails in that duty. The implications were staggering. If Marcus was right, the Broken Spur Ranch wasn't just a piece of property. It was a site of profound significance, possibly to beings not of this world. The question was why? What made this particular location special? Before Clint could voice these thoughts, Rosa called from the kitchen that dinner was ready. The conversation would have to wait. They ate in the kitchen, the familiar ritual of sharing a meal providing a semblance of normalcy in a day that had been anything but normal. Rosa had prepared a simple but hearty beef stew, the kind of comfort, food that seemed especially appropriate given the circumstances. Marcus ate little, pushing the food around his bowl more than consuming it, but he made an effort for Rosa's sake. As they were finishing, the sound of tires on gravel announced Sheriff Grace's arrival. Rosa went to let her in while Clint helped Marcus to the living room, where the metal box still sat on the coffee table. Grace entered, dressed in civilian clothes as requested, jeans and a flannel shirt, her copper hair loose around her shoulders. Only the alert watchfulness in her eyes betrayed her profession. Marcus, she greeted, concern evident in her voice. You look exhausted. Been a long day, he acknowledged. Thank you for coming, and for the discretion. Grace nodded, taking a seat across from them. Her gaze fell on the metal box. What's going on? Rosa said it was urgent. Marcus exchanged a glance with Clint, then began to explain. Not everything, but enough. He told her about Caldwell's visit and thinly veiled threats, about being followed to the cave, about his suspicions regarding the vandalism on his property. I can increase patrols past the ranch, Grace offered, and I'll look into Caldwell's recent activities. If he's behind the vandalism, I'll find evidence. I appreciate that, Marcus said. But there's something else I need. He gestured to the porsum. This contains something valuable, something that needs protection. I'd like to place it in your safe at the station temporarily. Grace studied the box curiously. What exactly is it? Better you don't know the details, Marcus replied. Just know it's important, historically and personally. Grace hesitated, clearly wanting to ask more questions, but something in Marcus's expression stopped her. All right, she agreed finally. I'll secure it personally. No paperwork, no questions. Thank you, Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. One more thing. If anything happens to me, this goes to Clint. No one else. Grace nodded solemnly. You have my word. She carefully picked up the box. I should get this secured. Will you be all right here tonight? I'll stay, Clint assured her. Keep an eye on things. After Grace left with the box, Rosa insisted on helping Marcus to bed, his strength clearly depleted by the day's events. When she returned to the living room, her expression was troubled. He's worse, she said quietly to Clint. The exertion today, it's accelerated things. I'm not sure he should be alone tonight. I'll sleep in the guest room, Clint promised. Keep an ear out. Rosa nodded gratefully. I'll be back at dawn. She gathered her things to leave, pausing at the door. Whatever's going on, whatever was in that box, it means a lot to him that you're here for this. After she left, Clint made a final check of the house, securing doors and windows. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the absence of city lights. He stood on the porch for a long moment, scanning the darkness, unable to shake the feeling that they were being watched. Inside, he settled into an armchair with a clear view of both the front door and the hallway leading to Marcus's bedroom. The events of the day replayed in his mind. The cave, the mysterious box, Caldwell's threats, and most significantly, Marcus's revelation about his grandfather's encounter in 1897. 3 incidents across more than a century, all on the same land. It couldn't be coincidence. The question was what connected them and why Marcus's family had been chosen as guardians of whatever secret lay buried in this valley. As midnight approached, Clint heard a sound from Marcus's room. Not a call for help, but the soft murmur of conversation. He rose quietly and moved to the partially open door, peering in. Marcus lay in bed, seemingly asleep, but speaking clearly, to someone unseen. I've kept my promise, he murmured. All these years. Now it's almost time. Clint watched, unsure whether to intervene in what appeared to be a dream or delirium. Then Marcus turned his head, his eyes open and surprisingly lucid. They're coming back, Clint, he said softly. That's what the box means. After all this time, they're finally coming back. Dawn broke over the Broken Spur Ranch with a spectacular display of color, the eastern sky painted in strokes of crimson and gold. Clint stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the day begin. He'd slept little, his mind too full of questions and his ears too alert for any sound of distress from Marcus or approach from unwelcome visitors. The night had passed quietly, however. After Marcus's strange statement about them coming back, he had fallen into a deep sleep, his breathing labored but steady. Clint had checked on him periodically throughout the night, finding him unchanged, the illness temporarily held at bay by exhaustion. The rumble of Rosa's pickup coming up the drive broke the morning stillness. She emerged carrying grocery bags, her expression brightening at the sight of Clint. You're up early, she observed, climbing the porch steps. Old habits, Clint replied, taking some of the bags from her. Marcus is still sleeping. Rosa nodded, following him into the kitchen. That's good, he needs the rest after yesterday. She began unpacking groceries with practiced efficiency. Sheriff Grace called me this morning, said she'd be stopping by later with some information. About Caldwell? She didn't say, just that it was important. Rosa paused, a carton of eggs in her hand. Mr. Eastwood, Clint, what's really going on here? I've worked for Marcus for almost a year and I've never seen him like this. It's not just the cancer. Clint considered how much to share. Rosa clearly cared for Marcus, but the fewer people who knew about the box and its contents, the safer everyone would be. Marcus is trying to protect his legacy, he said finally. Caldwell wants this land, and he's not above using underhanded tactics to get it. Rosa seemed to accept this explanation, though her eyes suggested she suspected there was more to the story. She continued preparing breakfast, and soon the kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and bacon. A sound from the hallway announced Marcus's approach. He appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane but dressed for the day in jeans and a flannel shirt. His face was pale, the lines of pain more pronounced than ever, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Smells good," he said, making his way to the table. Rosa immediately poured him coffee and set a plate before him. "You should have called for help getting up," she scolded gently. "Still capable of dressing myself," Marcus replied with a hint of his old stubbornness. He looked at Clint. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," Clint answered, studying his friend. "You?" "Like the dead," Marcus said, then grimaced at his own dark humor. "Grace called. Said she's coming by around 10 with news." They ate breakfast together, the conversation deliberately light. Rosa sharing gossip from town, Marcus reminiscing about past cattle drives, Clint offering carefully edited stories from film sets. It was almost possible to forget the events of yesterday, to pretend this was simply a reunion of old friends. After breakfast, Marcus suggested they sit on the porch. The morning was warming nicely, the air scented with sage and pine. Sadie, the old Australian shepherd, joined them, settling at Marcus's feet with a contented sigh. "About what I said last night," Marcus began once they were alone. "About them coming back," Clint nodded. "I wasn't sure if that was the pain medication. Talking. Wish I could blame it on that." Marcus gazed out at his land, expression thoughtful. "My grandfather's journal mentioned something similar. The being he encountered told him they would return, gave a time frame, when the cycle completes, whatever that means." "And you think that time is now? The box appearing after all these years. It feels like a sign." Marcus stroked Sadie's head absently. "Or maybe I'm just an old man trying to make sense of coincidences before I die." Before Clint could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. Sheriff Grace's personal Jeep came up the drive, dust billowing behind it. She parked beside Rosa's truck and approached the porch, her expression serious. "Morning," she greeted, declining Marcus's offer of coffee. "I've got news and you need to hear it right away." She glanced at the open windows. "Somewhere private?" Marcus led them to his study, closing the door behind them. Grace remained standing too, keyed up to sit. "I did some digging on Caldwell after I left last night," she began without preamble. "Made some calls to contacts in federal law enforcement. There's more to him than just a wealthy developer." "What kind of more?" Clint asked. "He has connections." "To a private research organization called the Prometheus Institute. They specialize in advanced technology, particularly materials science. Very secretive, very well funded." Grace pulled out her phone, showing them a photograph of a modern glass and steel building. "This is their headquarters in Nevada, about 3 hours from here." Marcus leaned forward, interest piqued. "What's their connection to my land?" "That's where it gets interesting," Grace continued. "The Prometheus Institute has been buying up properties throughout the Southwest. All rural, all with certain geological features in common. Deep caves, unusual mineral deposits, sites of unexplained phenomena." "Like UFO sightings?" Clint asked, keeping his tone neutral. Grace nodded. "Among other things, they're particularly interested in areas with historical reports of strange lights or objects in the sky." She turned to Marcus. "Your property fits the profile perfectly." Marcus and Clint exchanged glances, the implications clear. The Prometheus Institute wasn't just after land for development. They were hunting for exactly what Marcus had found. "There's more," Grace said, her voice dropping. "That box you gave me for safekeeping, I took some photos of it before locking it away. Ran the symbols through an image recognition database. Got a hit from a classified file that was part of the Snowden leaks." What kind of hit? Marcus asked. Similar symbols were found on materials recovered from a crash site in New Mexico, 1947. Grace's expression was a mixture of disbelief and certainty. Marcus, what exactly is in that box? Marcus sighed heavily, the weight of secrets carried for decades evident in his posture. It's complicated, Grace, and honestly, the less you know, the safer you are. Grace looked like she wanted to argue, but instead nodded reluctantly. Fair enough. But you should know. The box is secure, but I don't think it's safe at the station long term. If Caldwell has the connections I suspect he does, it's only a matter of time before they figure out where it is. We need to move it, Clint agreed. Today. I have an idea about that, Marcus said. But first, Grace, is there any legal way to keep Caldwell off my property, at least buy us some time? Grace considered this. I could issue a no trespass order based on the vandalism, but it would be temporary. A restraining order would be more effective, but we'd need evidence linking him directly to the incidents. Which we don't have, Marcus concluded. Not yet, Grace corrected. I've got deputies checking local security cameras, seeing if we can place Caldwell's men near your property when the vandalism occurred. She checked her watch. I should get back. The longer I'm here, the more attention it draws. After she left, Marcus turned to Clint, his expression grave. We need to retrieve the box and move it somewhere safer. I have a place in mind. The original hiding spot from '68? Marcus nodded. No one's found it in 55 years. It should hold a while longer. They were interrupted by Rosa calling from the kitchen that lunch was ready. The meal was a subdued affair, with Marcus picking at his food and Clint lost in thought. Afterward, Marcus announced he needed to rest before they headed into town later. While Marcus napped, Clint took the opportunity to walk the property, familiarizing himself with the layout of the ranch. The afternoon sun was warm on his shoulders as he made his way past the barn, where Miguel was working with one of the horses, and down to the small lake where they'd discovered the vandalized boat. The water was still and clear, reflecting the mountains like a mirror. Clint stood on the dock thinking about the strange turn his visit had taken. He'd come to make peace with an old friend before the end, not to become entangled in what appeared to be a decades-long mystery involving extraterrestrial artifacts and shadowy research organizations. Yet here he was, drawn into Marcus's world once more, just as he had been all those years ago when they first met on the set of The Good, the I, Bad and the Ugly. Marcus had been different then, strong, vital, full of life and plans for the future. The finest horse wrangler in the business with an almost supernatural ability to calm even the most temperamental animals. A sound behind him broke his reverie. Footsteps on the wooden dock. He turned to find Rosa approaching, her expression troubled. Marcus is asking for you, she said. He seems agitated. Clint followed her back to the house, where they found Marcus in his study, fully dressed and looking through old photographs spread across his desk. There you are, he said, looking up as Clint entered. Need to show you something before we go into town. He gestured to the photographs. Been going through old albums. Found this. The photograph he indicated showed a much younger Marcus, standing beside a tall, thin man in a dark suit. They were in front of what appeared to be a government building, neither smiling. That's Dr. Alan Hynek, Marcus explained. Taken in 1968, after I reported what I'd found in the cave. He was with Project Blue Book then, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program. Clint studied the image. You reported it officially? Not initially. But after those men came to the ranch asking questions, I got spooked. Thought going through official channels might offer some protection. Marcus's laugh held no humor. I was naive. What happened? Hynek seemed genuinely interested. Took detailed notes. 2 days later, I got a visit from men claiming to be from the Air Force. They confiscated Hynek's report and told me the matter was classified. Said if I ever spoke about it again, I'd be prosecuted under national security laws. Marcus shuffled through more photographs. That's when I decided to hide the piece I'd found and keep quiet. And now? Clint asked. 55 years later, you're breaking that silence. Why? Marcus looked up, his pale blue eyes intense. Because I'm dying, and someone needs to know the truth. Because that box appearing now after all these years can't be coincidence. He gathered the photographs into a neat stack. And because I trust you, Clint. Always have. The simple statement hung in the air between them, bridging the decades of separation. Clint felt the weight of that trust and the responsibility that came with it. We should get going, Marcus said, rising slowly from his chair. Grace will be waiting. The drive into Cedar Grove was quiet, each man lost in his own thoughts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, turning the sagebrush to gold and the distant mountains to purple. It was the kind of light cinematographers dreamed of, Clint thought. Magic hour when everything was transformed into its most beautiful self. They parked behind the sheriff's station using the less visible entrance as Grace had instructed. She met them at the door, ushering them quickly through a back hallway to her private office. No problems? Clint asked as she closed the door behind them. None so far, Grace replied. But I don't like this. The timing feels off. She moved to a small safe concealed behind a landscape painting, entering the combination with practiced ease. The door swung open to reveal the metal box exactly as they had left it. Marcus took it, holding it carefully. Thank you, Grace, for everything. Where will you take it? She asked. Better you don't know, Marcus replied. But it will be safe. Grace nodded, accepting this. I'll walk you out. My deputy's on patrol, so the back lot should be clear. They followed her through the hallway and out the rear door. The parking lot was empty except for their truck, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Everything seemed peaceful, ordinary. Then Clint noticed a black SUV with tinted windows, parked across the street, its engine running. We've got company, he murmured to Grace, who followed his gaze and immediately tensed. That's Caldwell's vehicle, she confirmed. How did they know you'd be here? Before either could respond, the SUV's doors opened and 3 men emerged. 2 were clearly security personnel, large athletic builds, alert eyes scanning the surroundings. The third was Victor Caldwell himself, looking as immaculate in the small-town setting as he had at the ranch. Well, Caldwell called as he approached, his tone conversational but his eyes hard. Sheriff Grace, Mr. Eastwood, Mr. Harlan. What a fortunate coincidence. This is a restricted area, Mr. Caldwell, Grace said, her hand moving subtly toward her sidearm. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Caldwell smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Of course, Sheriff. Just wanted a word with Marcus about our discussion yesterday. Perhaps we could continue it over dinner. My treat. Not interested, Marcus replied flatly, his hand tightening on the metal box partially concealed beneath his jacket. Caldwell's gaze dropped to the bulge, his smile faltering slightly. I see you've retrieved your family heirloom. How nice. His tone hardened. I wonder if you realize just how valuable that item might be to the right collector. The implication was clear. He knew exactly what they had. The question was, how? Mr. Caldwell, Grace said firmly. I'm not asking again. Leave now, or I'll have you escorted off the premises. For a tense moment, it seemed Caldwell might refuse. Then he inclined his head slightly. Another time, then. He turned to go, then paused, looking back at Marcus. Oh, and Marcus, you might want to check on your ranch. I heard there was some excitement out that way earlier. Fire department was called, I believe. With that parting shot, he returned to the SUV with his men, leaving a chill in the air despite the warm evening. The ranch, Marcus said, his face pale with more than illness. Rosa's there alone. Grace was already pulling out her phone. I'll call the station, see what's happening. She stepped away, speaking urgently into the device. Clint helped Marcus to the truck, concern mounting as his friend's breathing grew. More labored, the stress clearly taking a toll on his weakened body. Grace returned, her expression grim. There was a fire reported at the Broken Spur about 20 minutes ago. North pasture, near the tree line. Fire department responded, should have it under control by now. Rosa? Marcus asked immediately. She called it in. She's fine. Grace's eyes narrowed. This is escalating, Marcus. First vandalism, now arson. You need protection. What I need is to get back to my ranch, Marcus insisted. Make sure everyone's safe. Grace nodded reluctantly. I'll follow you out there, and I'm stationing a deputy at your place tonight. No arguments. The drive back to the Broken Spur seemed endless, though in reality it took less than 15 minutes. As they crested the final hill, they could see the aftermath of the fire, a blackened section of the north pasture where the grass had burned, and a fire truck still on scene, firefighters doing a final check for hot spots. Rosa was waiting, on the porch, her face etched with worry. She rushed to meet them as they pulled up. "Thank God you're back," she said. "It was deliberate, Marcus. Someone set that fire. I saw them, 2 men in dark clothing. By the time I called it in, they were gone." Marcus surveyed the damage from the truck window, his expression a mixture of anger and resignation. "North pasture," he said quietly to Clint, "where my grandfather reported the crash in 1897. The coincidence, if it was a coincidence, was too precise to ignore. Caldwell, or whoever he represented, wasn't just after the land. They were after specific locations on the property, sites of significance. We need to move the box tonight," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent, "before they come back." As darkness fell over the Broken Spur, the full moon rose above the mountains, casting silver light across the land. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, their eerie songs echoing through the valley. It was a night for secrets, for things hidden and revealed. And somewhere beyond the ranch, beyond the mountains, perhaps even beyond the stars themselves, something was stirring. The completion of a cycle begun long ago, when a craft of impossible design crashed during a thunderstorm, and a rancher made a promise to a dying visitor from another world. The night wrapped around the Broken Spur Ranch like a protective cloak, the darkness broken only by the silver glow of the full moon, and the distant flicker of the deputy's patrol car parked at the end of the drive. Inside the ranch house, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the metal box before him, his weathered hands resting on its smooth surface. "You sure about this?" Clint asked, watching his friend from across the table. Marcus nodded, determination evident despite his exhaustion. "No choice now. They know too much, and they're getting desperate." He glanced toward the window where the blackened section of the north pasture was visible in the moonlight. That fire was a message. Next time could be worse. Rosa had gone home reluctantly, only after Marcus insisted, and Sheriff Grace promised her deputy would remain on guard all night. Now it was just the 2 old friends, facing what might be their final challenge together. "Tell me about the hiding place," Clint said, pouring them each a small measure of bourbon. Marcus took a sip, the amber liquid bringing a momentary color to his pale cheeks. "It's on the property, but not where anyone would think to look. Not in the cave, not in the north pasture where the original crash happened." He smiled slightly. "My grandfather was clever that way," said the being told him to hide its gift where water meets stone beneath the guardian's gaze. "Sounds like a riddle. Took me years to figure it out," Marcus admitted. "There's a waterfall on the east side of the property, hidden in a box canyon. Hard to reach, especially at night, but there's a cavity behind the falls. That's where I hid the piece I found, in '68. "And the guardian?" Marcus pointed to the window where the full moon hung low in the sky. From the cave behind the waterfall, the moon rises directly between 2 rock formations that look like a face in profile. The guardian's gaze. Clint considered this. Poetic, but practical too. You'd only be able to find it easily during a full moon. "Exactly, and tonight's our chance." Marcus checked his watch. "We should leave soon. It's a half-hour drive to the canyon, then about a 20-minute hike to the falls." "You up for that kind of hike?" Clint asked, concern evident in his voice. Marcus's expression hardened. "Have to be, don't I? This is my responsibility. Has been since my father passed it to me and his father before him." He stood slowly, one hand pressed against his side where the pain lived. "I'll take some extra medication. should dull things enough to get there and back. They prepared quietly, gathering flashlights, water, and a small pack with emergency supplies. Marcus changed into sturdier boots and added a warm jacket. The night still cool in the high desert despite the warm days. The metal box was carefully wrapped in a soft cloth and placed in a weatherproof bag. "We'll take the Jeep," Marcus decided. "Better for the rough terrain than the truck." Before leaving, Clint stepped onto the porch to speak with the deputy, a young man named Rodriguez who seemed both honored and slightly overwhelmed by his assignment to protect a Hollywood legend and a local rancher. "We're heading out for a bit," Clint informed him. "Ranch business. Should be back in a few hours." "Sir," Sheriff Grace said to keep Mr. Harlan on the property, Rodriguez replied, clearly uncomfortable. "And we appreciate her concern," Clint said, smoothly. "But this can't wait. We'll stay in radio contact and we won't be far." The deputy hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll need to inform the sheriff." "Of course. Just give us a 30-minute head start before you call it in." Clint clapped him on the shoulder. "Thanks for understanding." Back inside, he found Marcus in his study, removing something from the safe hidden behind a landscape painting similar to the one in Grace's office. It was a small leather pouch, which Marcus tucked into his jacket pocket without explanation. "Ready?" Clint asked. Marcus nodded, his expression solemn. "As I'll ever be." They slipped out through the back door and made their way to the garage where Marcus kept his Jeep Wrangler, a vehicle better suited to the rugged terrain of the ranch than his vintage Ford. The engine started with a quiet rumble, and Marcus navigated carefully down the back drive, avoiding the main entrance where Deputy Rodriguez was stationed. "He seems like a good kid," Marcus observed as they pulled away from the ranch house. "Reminds me of Grace's grandfather when he first pinned on the star." "He'll call it in as soon as we're gone," Clint noted. "Counting on it," Marcus replied with a hint of his old slyness. "Grace will figure out where we've gone. If anything happens, to us at least someone will know where to look." The Jeep bounced along an old service road that skirted the eastern boundary of the property, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the foothills, juniper and pinyon pine giving way to steeper slopes and rocky outcroppings. Marcus drove with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of his land, navigating around obstacles that would have been invisible to anyone else. Despite his illness, his hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes alert in the dashboard's glow. "Almost there," he said as they rounded a bend and the road disappeared into what appeared to be a solid wall of rock. He stopped the Jeep and cut the engine. "We walk from here." The night was silent except for the cooling tick of the engine and the distant call of an owl. The full moon provided enough light to see by, casting sharp shadows across the landscape. Marcus retrieved a walking stick from the back of the Jeep, sturdier than his usual cane, and slung the pack containing the metal box over his shoulder despite Clint's offer to carry it. "My burden," he said simply. "At least for a little while longer." They set off along a narrow trail that wound between massive boulders, gradually ascending toward what Clint now recognized as the entrance to a box canyon. The path was challenging even in daylight. At night, with only moonlight and occasionally their flashlights to guide them, it required careful attention to every step. Marcus moved slowly but steadily, his breathing labored but controlled. Clint stayed close, ready to offer support if needed, but respecting his friend's determination to make this journey under his own power. As they entered the canyon, the sound of water reached them, a soft, constant rushing that grew louder as they progressed. The walls rose steeply on either side, narrowing as they advanced until they emerged into a small clearing where the canyon ended in a sheer cliff face. Down this cliff, a waterfall descended about 30 feet into a clear pool, the water silver in the moonlight. "Beautiful," Clint murmured, taking in the scene. "Wait," Marcus said, pointing upward. Clint followed his gesture and saw what he'd missed before. The full moon was rising directly between two rock formations at the top of the cliff, creating exactly what Marcus had described, the profile of a face with the moon as its watchful eye. "The guardian's gaze," he acknowledged. Marcus nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Now we need to get behind the falls. There's a ledge, narrow but passable, follows the cliff face around to the left." The ledge was indeed narrow, barely 2 feet wide in places, and slick with spray from the waterfall. They moved carefully, backs pressed against the rock wall, edging their way toward the curtain of water. Clint went first this time, testing each step before Marcus followed. Behind the waterfall, they found a small cave, just as Marcus had described. The roar of the falling water created a constant background noise, but the space itself was dry and protected. Marcus switched on his flashlight, revealing a natural chamber about 15 feet deep and 10 feet wide, its walls glistening with mineral deposits. "There," he said, directing the beam toward the back of the cave, where a natural shelf had been formed in the rock. "That's where I hid the piece from 68. They approached the shelf, and Marcus handed his flashlight to Clint while he carefully removed the wrapped bundle from his pack. The metal box gleamed in the flashlight's beam as he unwrapped it, its strange symbols seeming to shift and change in the moving light. "Now for the tricky part," Marcus said, reaching into his pocket for the leather pouch he'd retrieved from his safe. From it, he withdrew a small object that caught the light like polished metal, a key but unlike any Clint had seen before. Its shaft was inscribed with the same symbols as the box, and instead of teeth it had a complex arrangement of ridges and grooves. "Where did you get that?" Clint asked, fascinated. "My grandfather's journal mentioned it. Said the being gave it to him along with the device, told him they were connected somehow." Marcus examined the box carefully. "Took me years to figure out how they fit together." He located what appeared to be a small depression on one side of the box, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. The key fit perfectly, and Marcus turned it with a practiced motion. There was a soft click, and a panel on the top of the box slid open, revealing a compartment Clint hadn't noticed during their previous examination. Inside lay a small device similar to the one they'd found in the cave, but more elaborate, with what appeared to be a control panel of some kind. Marcus carefully lifted it out and set it on the rock shelf. "This is what my grandfather found," he explained, "or rather what was given to him. The being called it a beacon." "A beacon for what?" Clint asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "For them, when they return." Marcus placed the empty box beside the device. "And this," he continued, reaching into the pack again, "is what I found in 68. He unwrapped a second cloth bundle to reveal a piece of metal about the size of his palm, silvery and iridescent with the same strange symbols etched into its surface. Despite its apparent age, it showed no signs of tarnish or wear. The 3 pieces were separated deliberately, Marcus explained. "My grandfather's journal said the being told him they should never be brought together until the cycle completes. Whatever that means. And you think that time is now?" Marcus nodded solemnly. "The box appearing in the cave after all these years. It's a sign. The final piece of the puzzle." He arranged all 3 items on the rock shelf, the beacon, the metal fragment, and the device from the cave. Together at last. As if responding to their proximity, the symbols on all 3 items began to glow with a soft blue light, similar to what they'd witnessed in the cave but more intense. The light pulsed in a rhythmic pattern, like a heartbeat or a signal. "It's activating," Marcus whispered, awe evident in his voice despite his exhaustion. The blue glow intensified, and the beacon device emitted a low hum that seemed to resonate with the very rock around them. Then as they watched, the 3 items began to move on their own, sliding across the rock shelf toward each other until they touched. There was a flash of brilliant light that momentarily blinded them, and when their vision cleared, the 3 separate pieces had somehow merged into a single device, more complex and elegant than any of its component parts. It hovered slightly above the rock shelf, rotating slowly in the air, the blue light now emanating from it in concentrated beams that projected outward, creating a holographic display similar to what they'd seen in the cave but far more detailed. The display showed what appeared to be a star map, but unlike the one in the cave, this one included a timeline, a countdown of some kind with symbols changing rapidly. "My God," Marcus breathed. "It's happening, just like my grandfather said it would." Before Clint could respond, they heard a sound from outside the cave, voices and the beam of flashlights playing across the curtain of water. Someone's here, Clint said, moving quickly to the cave entrance and peering out through the falling water. On the bank of the pool stood 3 figures, 2 men in dark clothing who Clint didn't recognize, and Victor Caldwell, his expensive suit incongruous in the wilderness setting. How did they find us? Marcus asked, joining Clint at the entrance. Must have followed us from the ranch, Clint surmised. Or they've been watching this place knowing its significance. Caldwell's voice carried over the sound of the waterfall. Marcus, I know you're in there. We detected the activation signal. There's no point in hiding anymore. Marcus's expression hardened. He knows about the beacon. Marcus, please. Caldwell continued, his tone reasonable, persuasive. What you've found is too important to keep to yourself. The Prometheus Institute has been preparing for this moment for decades. We can help you understand what's happening. Like hell, Marcus muttered. He turned back to the hovering device, its blue light casting strange shadows across his gaunt face. We need to protect this, Clint. Whatever happens to me, this can't fall into their hands. What do you want to do? Clint asked, assessing their options. The only way out was past Caldwell and his men, and while he was still fit for his age, he harbored no illusions about his ability to overpower 2 younger men who were likely armed. Marcus reached into his pocket and withdrew his phone. First, we call for backup. He dialed quickly. Grace, it's Marcus. We're at the waterfall on the east property. Caldwell's here with 2 men. Yes, right now. Hurry. He ended the call and turned to Clint. She's on her way with deputies. 10 minutes, maybe 15. We need to stall them, Clint said. Marcus nodded, then called out to Caldwell. What do you know about the beacon, Victor? There was a pause, then Caldwell's voice again, closer now. He was approaching the ledge that led behind the falls. I know it's not of this earth. I know your family has been its custodians for generations, and I know it's activated now because the cycle is completing. Marcus and Clint exchanged glances, surprised by Caldwell's knowledge. How do you know all this? Marcus demanded. The Prometheus Institute has been studying these phenomena for over 70 years, Caldwell replied. We've collected artifacts, testimonies, ancient texts that all point to the same conclusion. Earth has been visited, repeatedly throughout human history, and those visitors left behind technology beyond our understanding. He was on the ledge now, moving carefully toward the cave entrance, his men following behind him. Clint tensed, ready for confrontation. What do you want with the beacon? Marcus called, buying time. To protect it, just as your family has, Caldwell answered, now just outside the curtain of water, but also to understand it, to prepare humanity for what's coming. And what exactly is coming, Victor? Marcus asked, his voice steady, despite the strain evident in his posture. Caldwell paused at the cave entrance, water cascading around him as he peered through. The return, Marcus. Just as your grandfather was told, they're coming back and we need to be ready. The hovering device pulsed more intensely, the holographic display shifting to show what appeared to be a trajectory, a path from a distant star system directly to Earth. The countdown symbols continued to change, but even without understanding their meaning, it was clear that whatever was being measured was approaching its conclusion. It's too late for that, Victor, Marcus said, gesturing to the device. They're already on their way. Caldwell stepped through the waterfall into the cave, water streaming from his expensive suit. His eyes widened at the sight of the activated beacon, its blue light reflecting in his pupils. His men followed, hands moving toward weapons concealed beneath their jackets. Magnificent, Caldwell breathed, momentarily forgetting the confrontation in his awe of the alien technology. After all these years of searching. That's close enough, Clint said firmly, positioning himself between the men and Marcus. Caldwell seemed to remember himself, tearing his gaze from the beacon to focus on them. Be reasonable, gentlemen. You have no idea what you're dealing with here. The Prometheus Institute has the resources, the expertise to handle this properly. My family has been handling it just fine for over a century, Marcus replied. Without your resources or expertise. As custodians, yes, Caldwell acknowledged. But now the beacon is active. The signal has been sent. What comes next requires more than just protection. It requires preparation on a global scale. As if responding to his words, the beacon's light intensified again, and the holographic display expanded to fill the small cave surrounding them with stars and symbols. A new element appeared, what looked like a craft of some kind moving along the trajectory toward Earth. "You see?" Caldwell said, his voice hushed with excitement. "They're coming, just as the legends said they would." "What legends?" Clint asked, genuinely curious despite the tension of the standoff. "Ancient texts from around the world speak of visitors from the stars who promised to return when humanity was ready," Caldwell explained, his attention divided between them and the mesmerizing display. "The Hopi speak of the blue star Kachina, the Maya of the return of Kukulkan, the Egyptians of the second coming of Osiris. Different names, same promise. They would return when the cycle completes." The holographic display shifted again, now showing what appeared to be a calendar of some kind, with the current date highlighted. According to the alien chronology, whatever cycle they were measuring was indeed nearing its end. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible over the waterfall. 3 days, Caldwell replied, studying the symbols. "If our translations are correct." The standoff continued, the 5 men watching the alien technology with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The beacon's hum grew louder, more insistent, as if responding to their presence or perhaps to something far beyond their perception. Suddenly, Marcus staggered, one hand clutching his side, his face contorted with pain. Clint moved to support him, concern overriding everything else. "Marcus?" "I'm all right," Marcus gasped, though clearly he was not. "Just need a moment." Caldwell took advantage of the distraction to step closer to the beacon, his hand outstretched toward the hovering device. One of his men moved to block Clint, while the other drew a weapon, not a gun but some kind of electronic device. "Don't touch it," Marcus warned, straightening despite his pain. "You have no idea what might happen." Caldwell hesitated, his fingers inches from the glowing technology. "The Institute has studied similar artifacts for decades. We know more than you think." "Not about this one," Marcus insisted. "My grandfather was given specific instructions. The beacon is meant for one purpose only, to signal their return. Interfering with it could have consequences none of us can predict." Before Caldwell could respond, the sound of sirens echoed through the canyon. Sheriff Grace and her deputies had arrived. Caldwell's men exchanged alarmed glances, clearly not prepared for a confrontation with law enforcement. "This changes." "Nothing," Caldwell said, withdrawing his hand reluctantly. "The beacon has activated. The signal has been sent. What happens next is beyond any of our control." He gestured to his men. "We're leaving." "But this isn't over, Marcus." "Actually, it is," came Sheriff Grace's voice from the cave entrance. She stood silhouetted against the waterfall, weapon drawn, 2 deputies visible behind her. "Victor Caldwell, you're under arrest for trespassing, harassment, and suspected arson." Caldwell's expression hardened, but he offered no resistance as one of the deputies moved forward to handcuff him. His men were similarly restrained, the electronic device confiscated. As they were led away, Caldwell turned back to Marcus. 3 days, Marcus. Whatever's coming, it arrives in 3 days. The world deserves to know." After they were gone, Grace approached the beacon, her expression a mixture of disbelief and wonder. "What is this thing, Marcus?" Marcus exchanged a glance with Clint, then sighed heavily. "It's a long story, Grace. One that started over a century ago and is apparently reaching its conclusion now." He gestured to the holographic display, still showing the approaching craft. "In 3 days we may have visitors, not from Mexico or Canada, but from somewhere much, much farther away." Grace stared at the display, then back at Marcus. "You're serious?" "Never been more serious in my life," Marcus confirmed. "And now we have a decision to make. Who else needs to know about this, and how do we prepare for what's coming?" The beacon pulsed once more, the blue light briefly intensifying as if emphasizing the urgency of his question. Outside, the full moon continued its arc across the sky. The Guardian's gaze now shifted, watching over a world on the brink of a revelation that would change everything. Dawn broke over the Broken Spur Ranch, painting the eastern sky in shades, of amber and gold. Clint stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun emerge from behind the mountains. 3 days had passed since the night at the waterfall, 3 days of preparation and waiting. The ranch had become the center of an operation unlike anything Cedar Grove had ever seen. Sheriff Grace had called in trusted colleagues from federal agencies, people she knew personally, not the anonymous men in suits that Marcus feared. A perimeter had been established around the property, ostensibly due to the recent fire, keeping curious locals and reporters at bay. Victor Caldwell remained in custody, denied bail due to the seriousness of the charges and his obvious flight risk. His Prometheus Institute had sent lawyers, of course, but Grace had built a solid case connecting him to the vandalism through evidence gathered from his men's vehicles and electronic devices. The beacon had been moved from the cave to Marcus's study, where it continued its countdown, the holographic display now showing less than 12 hours remaining. A small team of scientists, vetted personally by Grace and sworn to secrecy, monitored it constantly, documenting every change in its emissions and display. Clint heard the screen door open behind him and turned to find Marcus making his way slowly onto the porch. The past 3 days had taken a visible toll on him. His face was gaunt, his movements more labored than ever. The doctors had been blunt. The cancer was accelerating, his organs beginning to fail. He might have days left, perhaps a week at most. Yet there was a light in his eyes that defied his physical decline, a sense of purpose that seemed to sustain him through the pain. "Beautiful morning," Marcus observed, easing himself into a rocking chair. Clint nodded, taking the adjacent seat. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," Marcus replied with grim humor. "But I'll last the day. Have to." He gazed out at his land, the ranch that had been in his family for generations. "Never thought it would end like this. Always figured I'd just fade away quietly, maybe with a good horse and a bottle of bourbon for company. Instead, you're at the center of potentially the most significant event in human history," Clint observed. Marcus chuckled, the sound turning into a cough that he controlled with visible effort. Life's full of surprises. He glanced back toward the house where voices could be heard as the scientific team began their day's work. "Think they'll come? Really come?" "The beacon seems to think so," Clint replied. "And after everything you've told me, everything we've seen, I'd say it's more likely than not." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the ranch come to life around them. Rosa arrived with fresh groceries, having appointed herself chief of logistics for the operation. Miguel tended to the horses, keeping to their normal routine despite the extraordinary circumstances. Deputy Rodriguez patrolled the perimeter, nodding respectfully as he passed the porch. "I spoke with Michael last night," Marcus said suddenly. "My son." Clint raised an eyebrow, surprised. "How did that go?" "Better than I expected. Told him everything, the beacon, my grandfather's encounter, what's happening now." Marcus's expression softened. "He's flying in today. Should be here by noon." "That's good," Clint said sincerely. "Family should be together for this." "If he makes it in time," Marcus agreed. "If any of this is real and not the delusions of a dying old man." Before Clint could respond, Sheriff Grace emerged from the house, her expression serious. "Marcus, we've got movement on the beacon. The scientists think you should see this." They followed her inside to Marcus's study, now transformed into a makeshift research station. Computers and monitoring equipment surrounded the beacon, which hovered above a specially constructed platform. Its blue light had intensified overnight, and the holographic display now showed the approaching craft in much greater detail, a sleek, elongated vessel, unlike any human design. Dr. Elena Reyes, the astrophysicist leading the scientific team, looked up from her computer as they entered. "The beacon's energy output has increased by 300% in the past hour," she reported, "and we're detecting a response signal now. Very faint, but definitely there." "A response?" Marcus moved closer to the display, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. "From the craft?" Dr. Reyes nodded, excitement evident despite her professional demeanor. It's following the exact trajectory predicted by the beacon. Current calculations put its arrival at approximately 8:47 p.m. tonight, somewhere in this general vicinity. She indicated an area on the display that corresponded to the north pasture of the ranch, the same place my grandfather reported the crash in 1897, Marcus murmured. The cycle completes. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Additional security arrived. Not the military presence some had advocated for, but a small, discreet team of specialists recommended by one of Grace's federal contacts. Equipment was set up in the north pasture, sensors, cameras, and communication devices designed to document whatever might occur. Through it all, Marcus watched with a mixture of anticipation and weariness, his strength visibly ebbing as the day progressed. By mid-afternoon, he had retreated to a chair on the porch, observing the preparations from a distance, the pain medication making his thoughts slightly fuzzy around the edges. Clint stayed close, recognizing the signs of his friend's decline, but honoring his determination to witness the culmination of his family's century-long guardianship. They spoke little, the weight of the approaching moment making words seem inadequate. At 3 o'clock, a taxi came up the drive, and a man in his 40s emerged, Michael Harlan, Marcus's son. He had his father's height and build, though his features favored his mother. He approached the porch hesitantly, his expression a complex mixture of concern, skepticism, and regret. "Dad," he said simply, stopping at the foot of the steps. "Michael," Marcus replied, straightening in his chair with visible effort. "You came." "Of course I came." Michael climbed the steps, then paused, taking in his father's condition with shock poorly concealed. "You look like hell," Marcus finished for him. Cancer's not known for its cosmetic benefits. Despite the harsh words, his tone was gentle. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." Michael nodded, emotion making further speech difficult. He turned to Clint, extending his hand. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm Michael Harlan. Thank you for being here with my father." "Call me Clint," he replied, shaking the offered hand. "Your father's an old friend. No place I'd rather be." The awkwardness of the reunion was interrupted by Rosa, who emerged from the house with a tray of sandwiches and iced tea. "You must be Michael," she said warmly. "Your father's told me so much about you. Come, eat something. It's going to be a long night." As the afternoon waned, the activity around the ranch intensified. The scientific team moved their equipment to the north pasture, establishing a base camp from which to monitor the beacon and the approaching signal. Security personnel took up positions around the perimeter, their presence reassuring rather than intrusive. By 7 o'clock, a small group had gathered in the pasture. Marcus and Clint, Michael, Sheriff Grace, Dr. Reyes and her team, and a few select others who had earned the right to witness whatever might occur. The beacon had been relocated, here as well, its blue light now pulsing in a rapid, rhythmic pattern that seemed to intensify with each passing minute. The holographic display had simplified, now showing only the approaching craft and a countdown in alien symbols that Dr. Reyes had managed to partially translate. According to her calculations, arrival was less than 2 hours away. Marcus sat in a comfortable chair that Michael had insisted on bringing from the house, a blanket across his lap despite the mild evening temperature. His face was pale in the fading light, but his eyes remained alert, fixed on the beacon and the darkening sky above. "How are you holding up?" Clint asked quietly, taking the seat beside him. "I'm here," Marcus replied simply. "That's what matters." As darkness fell, the stars emerged one by one, brilliant in the clear mountain air. The scientific team grew increasingly excited, their instruments detecting anomalies in the upper atmosphere, fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, brief gravitational disturbances, phenomena that defied easy explanation. At 8:30, Dr. Reyes approached Marcus, her expression a mixture of scientific detachment and human wonder. "The signal is strengthening," she reported. "Whatever's coming, it's close now, very close." Marcus nodded, his gaze still fixed on the stars above. "Thank you, Doctor, for believing, for helping." "The evidence is compelling," she replied with a small smile. and I've always wanted to be part of First Contact. As she returned to her equipment, Michael took the seat on Marcus's other side, his initial skepticism now tempered by the undeniable data and the palpable sense of anticipation that hung in the air. "Dad," he began hesitantly, "I owe you an apology. About Caldwell, the land, everything." Marcus turned to his son, his expression softening. "No apologies needed. You didn't know. Couldn't have known. But I should have trusted you," Michael insisted, "instead of assuming you were just being stubborn about selling the ranch." "Well, I was being stubborn," Marcus admitted with a ghost of his old smile. "Just had better reasons than you knew." He reached out, placing his weathered hand over his son's. "What matters is you're here now. To witness this, to understand." "And after?" Michael asked quietly. "If something really does happen tonight, what then?" Marcus's gaze returned to the stars. "Then the ranch passes to you, along with everything. That means the responsibility, the guardianship." His voice grew stronger, more certain. "This land was chosen, Michael, has been for generations. Whatever happens tonight, that won't change." Before Michael could respond, a murmur ran through the gathered group. Dr. Reyes was pointing excitedly at her instruments, calling her team to attention. The beacon's pulsing had accelerated, its blue light now almost painfully bright. "Energy. Readings are off the charts," one of the scientists announced, "and there's something in the upper atmosphere, something big." All eyes turned skyward. At first, there was nothing visible except the familiar constellations. Then, gradually, a new light appeared. Not a star, not a plane, but something that seemed to shimmer and shift as it descended, its boundaries fluid and indistinct. "There," Dr. Reyes breathed, pointing to the phenomenon. "That's it. That's our visitor." The light grew larger, brighter, resolving into a definite shape as it approached. Elongated just as the holographic display had shown, with a silvery, iridescent surface that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. It made no sound as it descended, defying all human understanding of propulsion and aerodynamics. Marcus struggled to his feet, refusing Michael's attempt to help him, standing through sheer force of will as the craft approached. His face was illuminated by its glow, years seeming to fall away as he watched the fulfillment of a promise made to his grandfather over a century ago. The craft came to rest in the center of the north pasture, hovering about 10 feet above the ground. It was perhaps 60 feet long and 20 feet wide, its surface covered in patterns that resembled the symbols on the beacon. No obvious doors or windows were visible, no external features that might indicate its function or origin. For a long moment, nothing happened. The craft simply hung there, silent and mysterious, while the assembled humans watched in awe and trepidation. The scientific team's instruments recorded everything, though several had malfunctioned upon the craft's arrival, overwhelmed by whatever energy field surrounded it. Then the beacon's pulsing changed, becoming a single, sustained tone. In response, a section of the craft's surface began to shimmer and dissolve, creating an opening from which a soft, golden light emanated. A figure appeared in the opening, tall and slender, with proportions similar to a human but subtly different. Its skin had a silvery, almost translucent quality, and its large, almond-shaped eyes reflected the starlight like polished obsidian. It wore no clothing as humans would understand it, but its body seemed covered in a shifting pattern of light and shadow that preserved its modesty while suggesting great complexity beneath. The being descended from the craft without visible means of support, floating gently to the ground about 20 feet from where Marcus stood. It surveyed the assembled humans, its gaze lingering on the scientific equipment before coming to rest on Marcus. For a breathless moment, no one moved or spoke. Then the being raised a 7-fingered hand in what appeared to be a gesture of greeting. When it spoke, the sound seemed to bypass their ears entirely, manifesting directly in their minds. "The cycle completes," it said, "the concepts rather than the words translating into understanding, as was promised to your ancestor." Marcus stepped forward, his illness momentarily forgotten in the magnitude of the moment. "You know of my grandfather?" "We Remember all who keep faith, the being replied. Your family has guarded our beacon well. Through 3 cycles of your star, you have maintained the covenant. 3 cycles? Dr. Reyes whispered to no one in particular. That would be approximately 365 years. The being's attention shifted briefly to her, acknowledging her understanding, then returned to Marcus. We have watched your kind grow, develop, reach toward the stars. You have advanced much since our last visit, though much remains before you. Why have you returned now? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite his weakening body. To observe. To evaluate. To determine if the next phase may begin. The being gestured toward the beacon, which had ceased its pulsing and now glowed with a steady blue light. The beacon has served its purpose. It will now be reclaimed. As if responding to an unspoken command, the beacon rose from its platform and floated toward the craft, disappearing through the opening from which the being had emerged. What is the next phase? Sheriff Grace asked, finding her voice despite her astonishment. The being turned to her, its expression unreadable but somehow conveying respect for her authority. Contact. Limited at first, then expanding as your world proves ready. We are but one of many civilizations watching Earth. Others will follow our lead. A murmur ran through the assembled humans. Excitement, fear, wonder all mingled together. The implications were staggering. Not just one alien civilization, but many, all waiting to establish contact with humanity. The being returned its attention to Marcus, moving closer until it stood directly before him. Up close, its alienness was even more apparent, the subtle differences in proportion and movement that marked it as something truly other. Marcus Harlan, it said, using his name for the first time. Your life force ebbs. The disease consumes you. Marcus nodded, no point in denying what was evident. Yes, I'm dying. This need not be, the being said, raising its hand toward Marcus's face without quite touching him. We can remove the corruption from your cells, restore function to your organs. It is within our capability and would be a small repayment for your family's service. A hush fell over the group. Michael stepped forward, hope warring with disbelief on his face. You can cure him? Completely? The damage is extensive but reversible, the being confirmed. However, the choice must be his. All eyes turned to Marcus, who stood silent considering the offer. The pain that had been his constant companion for months could be ended. The death sentence lifted. He could have years, perhaps decades more of life. Why? He asked finally. Why would you do this? Your grandfather aided one of our kind when others would have responded with fear and violence, the being explained. That act of compassion has not been forgotten, and your own guardianship of the beacon has ensured our return could proceed as planned. Marcus glanced at Michael, then at Clint, his expression thoughtful. If you heal me, he said slowly, what happens then? Do you leave, return later? Our mission here has just begun, the being replied. We will remain in orbit around your world, observing, occasionally making contact with selected individuals. Your ranch will continue to be a site of significance to us, a place where our kind may safely interact with yours. Marcus nodded. Decision made. Then I accept your offer with gratitude, not just for myself, but for the chance to witness what comes next. The being inclined its head in acknowledgement, then raised both hands, palms facing Marcus. A soft golden light emanated from them, enveloping Marcus in a gentle glow that pulsed and shifted, seeming to penetrate his very being. For several minutes no one moved or spoke, watching in awe as the alien healing took place. Marcus's expression changed from initial surprise to profound peace, his posture straightening as pain visibly left his body. Color returned to his face, and the labored breathing that had marked his illness eased into a natural rhythm. When the light finally faded, Marcus stood transformed, not younger exactly, but restored to health, the ravages of disease erased from his body. He took a deep breath, his first without pain in months, and smiled with genuine joy. Thank you, he said simply. The being lowered its hands. The covenant continues then, Your family remains the bridge between our worlds. It turned to Michael. The son becomes guardian alongside the father. The legacy endures. Michael nodded solemnly, accepting the responsibility that had been his birthright all along. I understand. The being stepped back, surveying the assembled humans once more. We will return tomorrow night, and for many nights to come. There is much to share, much to learn from each other. Its gaze swept over the scientific equipment. Your records of this encounter may be preserved and shared with your leaders, but with caution. Your world stands at a threshold. How you step across it will determine much. With that, the being turned and moved back toward the craft, its form seeming to shimmer slightly as it ascended. At the entrance, it paused, looking back at Marcus. Until tomorrow, Guardian, it said, the title carrying weight and honor. Then, it was gone, the opening in the craft sealing seamlessly behind it. The vessel rose silently into the night sky, accelerating with impossible grace until it was just another point of light among the stars, indistinguishable from those that had witnessed Earth's long journey through the cosmos. For several minutes, no one spoke. The scientists checked their instruments, confirming that everything had been recorded. Security personnel maintained their positions, though the tension had left their postures. Sheriff Grace spoke quietly into her radio, assuring her deputies that all was well. Marcus stood with Michael and Clint, gazing up at the stars where the craft had disappeared. His body felt whole again, the constant pain replaced by a vitality he had thought lost forever. Well, he said finally, his voice strong and clear. I guess we should prepare for guests tomorrow. Michael laughed, the sound slightly hysterical, with relief and lingering shock. Just another day at the Broken Spur Ranch hosting interstellar visitors. Your grandfather would be proud, Clint observed, clapping a hand on Marcus's shoulder. You kept the faith, fulfilled the covenant. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. Not just me. My father, his father before him. We were all just links in a chain stretching back to that night in 1897 and forward to whatever comes next. He turned to Michael. A chain that continues with you. As the group began to disperse, heading back toward the ranch house where questions and discussions would continue long into the night, Marcus lingered in the pasture with Clint. The stars seemed brighter somehow, the universe both larger and more intimate than it had been just hours before. You know, Marcus said quietly, when I wrote to you 3 weeks ago, I just wanted to make peace before I died. Never imagined it would lead to this. Life's full of surprises, Clint replied, echoing Marcus's words from that morning. Especially when you have friends from out of town. Marcus laughed, the sound free and unburdened for the first time in months. Around them, the Broken Spur Ranch lay peaceful under the starlight. Its role in human history forever changed, yet somehow exactly what it had always been. A place where worlds could meet, where the impossible became real, where the future took shape from the dreams and promises of the past. And somewhere above, watching with ancient patience, Earth's cosmic neighbors prepared for the next step in a relationship that had begun over a century ago with a simple act of compassion from a rancher who chose kindness over fear when confronted with the unknown. The cycle had completed. A new one was just beginning. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.